Welcome to The Art Box, your podcast dedicated to exploring the vibrant art scene in Nevada and beyond. Join us as we embark on a journey through galleries, theaters, studios, public lands, and streetscapes, meeting the artists, curators, archaeologists, nature lovers, and cultural influencers who shape our creative community and our world. Whether you're looking for your next cultural adventure, seeking inspiration for your own artistic pursuits, or simply curious about the world of art, tune into The Art Box. Together, let's open up a world of creativity and imagination. Let's dive in.
Dreams, what if the night is about you and me? So lift your head up to the sky.
DeAnna, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for the kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here, Steve and Melissa.
And Melissa she is on the board of directors for the Women's History and Culture Center.
Yes.
Okay, I always say cultural, and Jean, the founder, she corrects me. And also Melissa is next year's president for the Mesquite Rotary.
Right. I'm currently the secretary.
Cool. So Melissa's here to talk about, you're a women's studies professor, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about who you are and how that kind of plays into your role as a professor, being an artist as well.
Yeah, and I think, Melissa, you were in the 82nd Air Division?
I was in the 82nd in the Army, and that was a thrilling experience. Sea of men and a handful of women.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt, that would be an exciting kind of experience, yes.
It was on many levels.
So, DeAnna, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, let's see. Where do we start? Do we want to start with the fact that I moved to the West after my master's degree and moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where I got my PhD at Northern Arizona University, and decided that I did not want to go back east except to visit family. And so I moved to Las Vegas in the summer of 1992, where I got a job at the then Clark County Community College, is now the College of Southern Nevada. And I've been here ever since. And I teach U.S. history, women's studies, women in American history, things like that. But I'm also an essayist and a poet and a creative artist, too.
And we've each read your poetry.
Love it. And I think that being that you are not originally from the desert and having a lot of your poetry be very desert heavy is very interesting. It didn't feel like there was a lot of reach back into a different climate.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of thing. I think I feel more myself here in the Mojave Desert than I ever did back east. I never felt like I fit in. I never felt like just all of that, right? And so moving west was something I think that helped me come into my own, and I feel much more comfortable in my skin, even if it is dry from the heat and the lack of humidity.
A little itchy, but it still feels like home.
So my wife yells at me every morning because I take a long shower. She's like, "You take such a long..." It's my daily dose of humidity. So otherwise, I don't get it. I'm ready to face the West.
Yes, that's it's an interesting thing for people to get used to, right? And the water is so hard, right? That you have to get used to, the amount of soap and the amount of shampoo that you have to use.
Mm-hmm. I had someone tell me last summer I was really stressed out about something, and they were like, just go take a cold shower and relax and you'll feel better. And I said, we don't have cold water here. That's not a thing. There's no cold showers from like June to October.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I love it. I really liked your poetry specifically. I got this feeling, and I love the art on the front cover. When I was really young, we grew up kind of in this area, Salt Lake and Phoenix, between Salt Lake and Phoenix, and I lived in California for a while. But my adult life, I've lived all over, and two things I absolutely love are the mountains and Joshua trees. So I remember even being 13 and going to the National Forest and being just in awe at how beautiful a Joshua tree is. And it's such an odd-looking tree, and it's so beautiful. And there's something really fascinating that something so beautiful can be in this barren wasteland like one of the prettiest things in the world is to see a cactus bloom.
Yes, absolutely. I would not disagree with that at all. And, many people think of the desert as just empty, right? And that gives them the assumption that they can just do things like test nuclear weapons and, put solar panels everywhere, right? Because there's like nothing here, right? And we know all you have to do is walk out into the desert and you know that it's not like that. You see all kinds of vegetation and you see all kinds of little scurrying creatures running around, right?
Right. And I think as I age, I appreciate the desert landscape more because as women, we're kind of like that beautiful green meadow in a lush land when that's our youth. And then as we age, people see us more as a desert, and it's funny and sad because a desert is, I feel like it's more resilient when it's given just a little bit of nourishment, and maybe that's why I kind of connect to the desert as I get older. Even when I was young, though.
You're still a youngster.
I know, I'm 46.
Oh, my goodness, you're so young.
I just think that the desert is, I agree, it's very underrated and misunderstood, and I don't know.
Yes, just like a lot of women are misunderstood, right?
Absolutely.
Do you guys want to dig into that subject?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
That women are misunderstood?
Yeah.
Women,
Okay.
the desert.
We can dig into that.
So with the Women's History Center, it's Jean who is the founder, and she has so many great stories. And Jean and I both have one thing in common. We worked at AT&T. And she was she got promoted to be an engineer. I'm sure you've heard the story,
I love
Melissa.
her story.
And her instructor was sabotaging her work that she had to get done to be able to become a full-fledged engineer. I can remember those days.
Well, she's fascinating on so many levels. And I think when you sit back and you take the opportunity to listen to someone's story, you can find one way or another to relate to it. So, or even just maybe see them as more of a whole person. For you, it was the fact that she was at AT&T, and for me, it was she was telling a story about trying to buy her house, and they said that's never going to happen, and I'm a mortgage broker. So it's, it's funny how you can take little tiny pieces and find a way to connect to them. So, anyways, that was totally off topic. Not off topic, but kind of off the point. But yeah, Jean's fantastic. She's a little powerhouse.
What an interesting story about AT&T, because they were among the first class action lawsuit that was filed under the Title VII, right? That to stop job discrimination on the basis of sex. And the EEOC.
G'day everyone, Addie. Breaking in here as Melissa asked if I would provide some details of the EEOC. During the 1960s and 1970s, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, played a pivotal role in advancing women's rights in the workplace. Established in 1965 to enforce Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the EEOC initially focused on race-based discrimination, but quickly became a key arena for challenging gender inequality. Women activists and organizations pressured the EEOC to address widespread issues such as discriminatory hiring practices, unequal pay, lack of promotions, and pregnancy-related job dismissals. In response, the EEOC began to interpret sex discrimination more broadly, issuing guidelines that prohibited sex-segregated job ads, enforced the principle of equal pay for equal work, and took on landmark cases against major employers. This era marked a significant turning point, as the EEOC laid the groundwork for later legislation and legal precedents that strengthened workplace protections for women across the United States. Melissa and DeAnna, I am enjoying your discussion. Thank you for letting me sit in.
They were one of the first class action lawsuits to stop kind of some of that level of discrimination that took place in AT&T. And that was, I think, 71, something like that, I think. Yeah.
And that's probably around the time when she worked there.
Yeah, and she's a touch older than me, so
I think she's 80 something, or she just turned 80.
Yeah, because when I came, we didn't have a women's room in some of the offices I worked in, believe it or not.
I do believe it. I've seen Hidden Figures.
Why I think taking history classes is a very important kind of thing, because students get information that they might not otherwise hear about. And then they look at you like, what? Did this really happen? I'm like, yeah, that really happened. Yes, for many years, the help wanted ads in the newspapers were girls wanted, and then that was a whole separate section, and then there was the section available for men, jobs for men. And and so those are things that people don't realize.
Right, and that
Right.
there's still a certain level of separation when it comes to jobs and job availability. One of the roles I play at the Women's Center is to get speakers of women that have experience in male-dominated fields so they can speak to the younger generation about not only the possibility of getting into job roles that maybe aren't normally, quote-unquote, normally for them, but that it is attainable and you can talk to someone about the way to get there. And I think that's really, really important.
Do you tell these stories in your women's studies classes? And is it a surprise to for your
For
students?
for some of the students it is. I often talk about these in my history classes, just in general, and not just the women's studies classes. And that's an interesting thing because there's often a different group of students that you reach in the history classes compared to the women's studies classes. And so the women's studies classes are often, those students, most of them are not surprised by many of these things that we talk about in the class, the articles that they read, sort of those kinds of things. But the students in the history classes are like, wait, what?
Yeah, I don't doubt
Can
it.
you repeat this? Like, really? I'm like, yeah, this really happened. And this is, I like to see that as part of sort of what the experience of being in college is about, right? That you learn new things and you're exposed to ideas that you may not have gotten in the K-12 system, in part because of the way a lot of teachers are forced to teach right now and what they're forced to teach or asked to teach. Because I know sometimes the state standards place some limitations on what teachers can do, and sometimes principals in schools limit what teachers can tell their students, right? So there are gaps often in what students know when they get to the college classroom, and they're like, I never heard this before. I didn't know this. Yeah, I look at them and say, thank you. You're welcome, right? I'm glad to do this.
I love blowing the doors off of younger people, or even really anyone that doesn't realize pieces of history, or especially when it comes to discrimination or things that are and are not available, or were not available at some point. But that actually kind of leads me to a question about art and your artistic process. And do you ever find yourself using your writing and your poetry to really get those feelings out, and is that something that you use for inspiration or use your art as an outlet?
Good question. I get sort of inspiration from a number of different places, and a lot of times it is like things that I've read and things that I've been thinking about, and sometimes current situations happening, right? And sometimes those are not really the best poems. I just need to get them out so that I can write the better poems. And that's a fascinating sort of thing, right? That it's really looking at the news stories, looking at, other or books that I'm reading, right? I just finished, for example, a diary of Thompson, who was on the John Wesley Powell expedition, the second expedition on the Colorado. And it's really fascinating to get those little snippets of what they saw. And then I'm like, okay, have I been to that place? Can I get to this place without having to be on the river? And so there's those types of things that sort of create this back and forth dialogue of, the inspiration, the creative kind of expression. We can't live in the Colorado River Basin without having some kind of connection to John Wesley Powell.
Yeah, and we should have listened to John Wesley Powell. Hey,
Yes, we should have.
Since Melissa brought up inspiration, I know that you said Mary Oliver. is inspiration for you. And she said some things about understanding the pain and wonder of nature. And the other thing she said, confronts what she cannot change. Do you want to talk a little bit about Mary Oliver?
Mary Oliver is just part of the reason why I really admired her is her poetry is just very accessible. And it's just these close kind of observation of nature. But there was always those little nuggets of wisdom that are just right there and like, oh, okay, wow, this is pretty incredible. And she's got just a huge body of work that you can draw from. That's a lot of fun to just go through and pick pieces out. And, oh, look, she has a poem about this. I just saw a fox, and look, she has a poem about a fox, and and it's a delightful poem. So she's somebody that I will go back to and pull, her books off the shelf and peruse through them every once in a while. And still inspirational and still just a treasure. May she rest.
Yeah, and I noticed you have many people that, Van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh.
It's my favorite.
I didn't know Vincent van Gogh wrote poetry.
I
Oh, he didn't.
Oh, he
I was
didn't?
going to say, I don't think I was aware of that.
Oh,
No,
so
I was
it's
talking about his art. Yeah, I was talking
okay.
about his artwork, right?
I thought I had
Those
missed out
are
on
the
a whole
artists that I admired.
side of him. Yeah, Van Gogh's one of my ultimate favorites. Vincent's Room was always my favorite for some weird reason. I got obsessed with that chair and found one.
Yeah.
I like the idea of delving into, creative inspiration and kind of how you get into a place of creativity when you're feeling stuck. That's probably one of my very favorite topics to talk about, especially when it comes to expressive writing. How do you get unstuck? And painting and writing, I think, are two things where you can get lost in the weeds and really lose your way and then just keep reading the same thing over or writing something that doesn't feel good. And is there a little piece of inspiration you can always reach for to break out of that?
Yeah, in fact, I was just in a little poetry class this morning, and that's something that I'll do if I'm feeling creatively stuck. Will sometimes sign up for a workshop that will be a generative workshop and hopefully get some words on the page. But I've become much more comfortable with those periods where you do feel stuck, where it's like the words aren't coming. And so that's when you read. That's when you sit down with a favorite poet or a new poet and you read and you look at what they're saying on the page. You're looking at how they formed their poems. You're looking at the topics. You're looking and gathering interesting words, right? So I've taken to sort of that approach if I'm ever feeling creatively stuck. And just, in fact, I was just in this recently, like for about 2 weeks, I wasn't able to really write a poem, right? And sometimes they just really come out and everything's flowing. And then sometimes it's like, okay, so what am I really trying to say? What do I want to talk about? And I've been thinking a lot about grackles and how noisy they are and how people really don't like grackles.
Oh, come on. I love them.
I know.
But they are noisy little buggers.
They are noisy. They wake you up. They, gather in trees and shout and all of that. But they always make me smile. And I know many people find that really annoying, right? Because they call them a plague. And so I've been thinking about the grackles for a while. And so I just did some research. That's often a response that I'll do if I'm feeling stuck, is I will just gather facts about grackles and, listen to their calls and try to get the noise of their calls and characteristics about them or something like that. And this is where being a historian helps with the research skills, right? And then I will, just this morning in the workshop that I was in, I had a half hour of quiet time and I wrote a poem about them. And so I'm like, this is kind of fun. This is what I was getting at. This was So sometimes it takes, a while to get through those creative blocks to be able to get to a point where you can write what you need to write, or say what you want to say what you need to say at that particular point.
Are you going to recite that for us?
I was just going to ask.
Do you want me to?
I would love it.
Let me see if I have it
Here's
here.
something fresh.
It's looked like at least we've two to nothing. now you can vote no, but we've outnumbered you here now.
Okay, well, let me look it up here because I did type it up. Where is it?
While you're looking at it, do you like to work in quiet? Is solitude part of your? Does that help you or?
Absolutely. Quiet, just being in that sort of meditative state is kind of helps a lot. And it, not always, but often in the writing stage, the quiet is good. In the revision stage, sometimes I like to have music playing, and it's usually a quartet that I listen to quite a bit. I have just about everything that they've produced, called Brooklyn Writer, and they do some classic, older classical music, but also a lot of compositions by younger, newer sort of composers. And it's amazing. And it's often it's joy, often very joyful kind of music. And that helps sort of with the revision. All right. So I have the Noisy Birds here. If you want to hear that new poem. So it's, still may change over time, but this is where it stands from this morning. Ode to the Noisy Birds. A raucous choir of shrieks and squawks, a riot of sound. Chirp, trill. O great-tailed grackles, no beloved songbird, a plague. Cha, chitip. Praise your eyes lined with white, your tan chests, brown heads, sleek black bodies, beaks and talons like armor. Wake every statue, shake loose the apathy. Chirp, trill, cha, chitip. Chirp, trill, cha, chitip.
Love it.
I think it's pretty much, I might change the shape a little bit or mess with some of the words, but that's where it stands right now.
It was very visual for me. I like that a lot. I love birds in the morning. It is one of the things I really look forward to, especially this time of year. It is something that starts off my day. So as soon as I'm out of bed, I swing the front door open, and my son is always like, "Mom, what are you doing? Shut the door." I can't. I have to hear the birds outside. I love it. I love it in the morning.
Yeah, there's something quite joyful about seeing birds when you're outside, even just that short walk to the mailbox, right? I have mockingbirds in my neighborhood, and those are always just joyous to see, even if you get too close to their nest and they swoop down on you.
A little bit of danger with your
yeah, just
joy.
a little bit.
I love the birds in the morning, and then I'm close to the river here, so I hear the frogs. Or are there toads here? I'm not sure which. I know they're different. My dad would correct me on that. And the grasshoppers, and I love it. This is one of my very favorite sounds at night.
Yeah, that's great to go to sleep with that when you can open the windows.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting close to the time you can't open the windows, though.
Yeah. Then
I know, that's always the sad time of year.
But I'm okay with summer, too. Are there any recurring themes or messages in your artwork? And if so, what do they mean to you?
Good grief. I mean, we cannot live in the Mojave Desert and in the Colorado River Basin without having water being a prevailing theme. I mean, for me, it's virtually impossible to do that. I am always somehow the river, the water often makes its way into my poems. But then the birds come in, right? And all of those, just really, that's a big recurring kind of thing. And concerns about drought and prolonged sort of overuse of resources and things like that. And sometimes those are the difficult poems to write because I'm still too angry in the poems. I know anger has a place, but I'm really trying to sort of look at things from sort of the perspective of nature rather than, it's not necessarily my place in nature, but really to keep the human element out and just appreciate the birds for who they are, appreciate the river for what it is and what it does, the Joshua trees and the cactus and everything, right? Appreciate it for what it is. And hopefully in those kinds of little odes and things, people may see this place a little differently, that people might look at things a little expansively, right? That there's more here than meets the eye.
Absolutely. I find it really fascinating that water, being someone that really loves the desert, that water is a recurring theme. I hope you don't mind if I ask, is that to me feels like a really emotional connection, and you did mention anger. So I find that really fascinating, because if we're in the desert, but water is something that comes up a lot, it feels like maybe searching for something that's missing, or, like a longing for something to nourish you. I don't know if that's maybe too personal or hitting, or I'm reading too much into it maybe.
Yeah, I think there is sort of a personal connection here, because I have hiked in the Grand Canyon and have walked close to the Colorado River. I have dipped my toes in it. I did a short river trip on the Colorado through the part of the Grand Canyon a number of years ago with a U.S. Geological Survey team. And this was like in the, late 80s, I think, that I did that. I was still in Flagstaff. And that was just such a phenomenal and remarkable kind of journey to take. And there is sort of a spiritual connection as well, right? So it's personal, but it's spiritual. The desert is a holy place. The earth is a holy place, but the desert is, for me, a very holy place.
Well, and if you look back in history, the desert wasn't always a desert. And you can look around and find a lot of dry lake beds and rivers. And if you take a step back and, historically, if you pull back, it really is there. It's always there, but it's not something that's on the surface but it is something that's ever present.
Absolutely true. I mean, that's why studying geology is a lot of fun, because you begin to learn how to read the land in terms of what's here and old sand dunes that have fossilized. I mean, just think of just that very thing of a fossilized sand dune is amazing to me. And how there's signs of ancient water, right, that you can see. Throughout the Las Vegas Valley, we can see that. I mean, for goodness sakes, the wetlands that we have here used to be, part of this massive amount of water in the area. And we had the megafauna and flora that was here that to me is just incredibly fascinating. The land holds all of those memories, right? All of that past is there to be read in the land.
Absolutely. Have you driven through the Virgin Valley, the gorge between Mesquite?
Yes.
I
have driven through that many, many times.
That's a thrilling example of really seeing the layers of where water used to be and what water can do. It was carved by water. It's unbelievably beautiful. And when you hit it, like this time of year specifically, if you go out there, it's so green and beautiful. But it's the desert now, but water was there. It is still a little bit, but not
a little bit.
Not so much.
A little bit.
But
yes.
I find that fascinating that water is there. And is there something visually, like something in the desert that is actually like present, like a Joshua tree or a cactus or something like that you visualize or you go and visit when you need a little inspiration, or just even like that touch of nature? I think we all crave that sometimes. Some people go and put their feet on the ground, or I really like to go and look at desert blooms or put my feet in the hot sand sometimes. Is there something like that you have that you reach to?
I feel the need often to be outside and doing, touching these places and seeing these places, either with my feet and walking or driving through places, so I can see some of these, vast hills and the valleys and the, Joshua trees and everything that's there. I can tell when I haven't done it enough. Mm-hmm. because I'm more tense. I'm a little cranky. And so I've really tried this year, actually starting in last fall, I've really tried to get out more frequently when the weather's good. And boy, has that helped. I would highly recommend everybody to kind of do those kinds of things. And, you know, when somebody tells you to go touch grass, there's a reason why they're telling you this, right? That to be grounded, to feel sort of the earth beneath you is essential, because the less we do that, the more disconnected we are from the planet, the more we're disconnected from each other. And we're already disconnected enough. We don't need to exacerbate that.
And the fact that that specific term is used as an insult these days is really kind of funny, a little bit on topic, a little bit ironic that go touch grass is probably what people need, but it has a different like connotation.
Yes.
So that's kind of really funny.
But we have to go back east to touch grass.
That's true.
That's true. Yeah, the Water District just sent I'm sure you all received this too, that they want everybody to get rid of grass by a certain time, right?
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I don't have any grass in my yard at all. It's all rock.
We live on the golf course, so we still got the grass.
Oh, yeah, that's not going to change.
I am really excited about Robert Macfarlane's writings. And if you are not familiar with him, he's in the UK and he writes these amazing books about nature and things like that. And he takes 3 or 4 years to write these massive kind of books that are just wide ranging and amazing. And it talks a lot about language and the earth and all of this. He's got a new book coming out in May on rivers, which I'm very excited about for obvious reasons. I don't think he talks about the Colorado, but he does talk about rivers in North America and South America and in the UK and I think in Asia too. So he traveled everywhere to kind of study the rivers and all of this. And so that's kind of, I find really, really interesting at this point. I'm excited about that. Okay, so why don't I talk about what it's like to be teaching history and women's studies and being a creative person.
Absolutely, right? Because one feels so black and white to a lot of people.
And this is it, right? We contain multitudes, right? And it's just recently that I've started telling my students about some of these things, right? It's like, yes, your professors have these kinds of creative lives too, that we're not just this one kind of thing. We do other things also, and it's enriching, and that's part of our balance, a work life and a creative life and a work life. And, you know, I feel now with my creative life that I'm getting back to what I found most great when I was a child, because I wrote poetry when I was a child. I drew all the time. I took art classes and all of those things. So I feel like I'm coming back into sort of this sense of joy in this kind of creation. And I've loved teaching. I still love teaching. I love sharing information with people. But I also like sharing this other part of me now too. And that's a different kind of teaching, if that makes sense. And just doing that. And so I think during lockdown and the pandemic years, right, that really woke a lot of people up for the need for having a bigger balance between work and life. Mm-hmm. And I have been trying to do that years before sort of the lockdown, but that gave me a much wider permission to do some of those things and explore. So I started painting again, and I hadn't done that since college. And more dedicatedly drawing and doing, that kind of creative work. And I'm so glad of that, right? It helps me be more balanced. It helps dissipate a lot of stress. I am so much less stressed now than what I was. It helps me let go of some things, right? It's okay if this doesn't happen today because I'm doing this, and that's fine, right? And I think those are, just important things for us to keep in mind about each and every one of us, right?
Absolutely. And on that note, and it kind of goes into the artistic releases, I think, were you able to get a little bit more of an appreciation for finding your community in that way too, when it showed us that we needed that, the COVID showed us that we really needed that balance and to find better ways to have balance in work and creativity in life, but also in community. I feel like that taught us a really deep lesson there, and community can really be a big healing part of the stresses we feel, especially when you have a career that deals with discrimination in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I absolutely. Community is such an important kind of thing. And there's been a lot of discussion again about Robert Putnam's book, The Bowling Alone.
Addie, breaking in once again to talk about Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community. His book is a landmark sociological work that explores the decline of social capital in the United States. Published in 2000, the book argues that Americans have become increasingly disconnected from one another and from civic institutions over the past several decades. Putnam uses the metaphor of bowling leagues to illustrate this trend. While more people are bowling than ever, they are doing so alone rather than in organized groups. Drawing on extensive data, he shows how participation in everything from PTA meetings to religious groups to neighborhood associations has diminished, weakening the fabric of American democracy. Putnam traces the causes of this decline to generational change, television and screen time, suburban sprawl, and time pressures. Despite the sobering analysis, he concludes with a call to action, urging renewed investment in civic life to rebuild the trust and engagement that sustain a healthy society. Thank you.
And how we've just become so individualistic that we've lost a lot of that sense of community that bound us together and led to more community problem solving and things. I mean, it hasn't totally gone away. There's still, we can still find community. It's just, we need to do that much more now, because that's where we're going to find care. That's where we're going to find comfort. That's where we're going to find connection with each other, is through those communities. The world will be a better place if we do more of that, because that will help us with empathy, that will help us with understanding how we're all connected to each other,
And
because we're not islands.
Do you have an artistic community and maybe people that you get together with and collaborate or do classes or projects with?
Okay, with poetry, absolutely. I have poetry community and people that I share things with, and we share back and forth and all of that. But the artist thing, I'm still kind of working on building that community and finding inroads into that. And it's happening, and I love it. And it makes me very happy to find those communities and to do that. Could our days be more than 24 hours just to be able to do some of that stuff and not some of these other things that...
Right.
Oh, thank you. I've been lobbying for a 48-hour day.
But again, we can't fill those hours with just work stuff. We have to have it with other things.
And do you ever find creative ways of bringing your art into the classroom, either through maybe sharing some poetry that's relevant, whether you wrote it or not? Do you ever find ways of working that in to maybe help the group as a whole if it's a heavy subject, or just for fun?
Yeah, I have. I do that periodically. For example, a lot of in the 1920s, when I talk about the Harlem Renaissance, right, I share poetry there from the Harlem Renaissance.
Great time to do that.
Yeah, and share some poems sometimes from the 60s where, people were beginning to grapple with different kinds of ideas and things. And, I'll talk about novels. I'll talk about creative work that people did and how that relates to things. I'll talk about artists and how their artwork connects to particular times too. And I do this in women's studies too. I have some poems and personal essays that are not mine, that are others, that I ask them to think about some of the themes from those and how that connects to their own lives. So they see those kinds of connections and look at perhaps their lives in a way that they may not have done before. I find that fulfilling. For a while, I was giving what I call an essay assignment in women's studies, where students could pick a creative project to do on a topic that they found interesting throughout the course of the class. So I've had short poetry chapbooks, I've had personal essays that came through, I've had paintings and things like that, and I love that. That I just would like more people to do that instead of the 4 or 5 who chose that as an option.
Mm-hmm. Who knows, maybe people need to understand that art doesn't just look one way. That's probably...
Yeah, and often we can say things through the art and through sort of creative writing that we would not be able to say the same kind of thing if we were writing a straight, research paper or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love seeing, especially through creative writing and poetry, how it does change especially through the years. And when it comes to like political movements or whatever like hot button topics are, I love to see the difference in the voices and the types of writing and how the language changes over the years. I think that's so fascinating and it's really fun.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so wild to look back at the abolitionist movement. There were poets writing about abolitionism. Mm-hmm. There were people making drawings and doing different kinds of things related to the abolition of chattel slavery. But we could see that in the woman suffrage movement, right? That mm-hmm. there was all kinds of poetry being written about that, and really funny one-act plays that were trying to challenge what the anti-suffrage group was right, saying. Right. And I love all of those kinds of creative expressions, right? That they had songs, right? All of these social movements had songs associated with them because that's part, I think, of our natural predilections as human beings, right? That we like to tell stories. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those stories are songs, and sometimes those stories are more epic poems, right? Where we sat around the campfires and talked about these things and shared these lines.
And you brought up something, I think people really do miss the fact that humor is art. And especially when it comes to writing, a lot of people, you talk about poetry and creative writing, and they're thinking creative writing is Shakespeare or something very, I hate to say it, I'm not a Shakespeare fan, but boring and like too many words. And they forget that it can be funny and it can be light and it can be graphic or short or punchy. It doesn't have to flow. It doesn't have to rhyme. It doesn't have to have big words. And I think that people really miss that sometimes, that one of the best ways to process hard things or use as an outlet is humor. And that's true even when you're doing poetry or creative writing or songs and things like that. I think that gets lost a lot of the time.
You want to talk about the honeycomb project?
Sure, we can talk about that. I just finished my 6 little honeycombs for the project. Candace Garlock, who's in Truckee Meadows Community College, is a great printmaker, ceramicist. What else does she do? Painting. She's a pretty great all-around sort of artist. And so she thought about this idea of having these collaborations with the honeycomb. So there are like 200, I think at this point, artists who are making these little honeycombs that will be on display for about 2 years in northern Nevada and in southern Nevada. And just all about, I think the goal was to have those to be about the area where you're from in some way. And so my 6 pieces are all related to the Las Vegas Wetlands Park, which I adore. And I love walking in it all the time. I'm I haven't been back since the fires went through in the last week, so I'm hoping that there hasn't been too much damage there. So there's all of these people, and when you look at them together, because there's groups of them that are together. She has I think a website now for the Honeycomb Project where you can see some of those. It's amazing. And it's kind of like if you've seen those posters, like there's a poster of Abraham Lincoln's face, but all it is, if you get really close, are all of those little photographs of Matthew Brady that have been put together to make his portrait. It's kind of like that, but not really, because it's not going to be any one thing, but it's just this complex web of everything. And I'm just kind of delighted to be part of that.
I ask you about that selfishly because I've been invited to participate. I guess she's going to have something for us at the Basin and Range Exchange in Ely on May 7th that's sponsored by Nevada Arts.
Sweet.
So I saw you put that in there. I'm like, oh, I need to ask about it now.
Yeah, I was just so pleased about that. I got, one of my friends said, you should do this. You should find out about this. And I'm like, okay. So then I asked, and here I go. And it's kind of fun. It was really fun to come up with things. So I did a mix of collage with origami paper and acrylic painting. So some of them are just collage and some are just painting, and then a couple are a mix of painting and collage.
I'll look forward to seeing that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So we have about 4 minutes because the Steam Center is going to close.
Okay.
Yeah, kick us out.
Yeah, and your son's out there enjoying.
He's 3D printing.
He's 3D printing.
I would actually just really love to hear that. What has been your inspiration? I think when it comes to art, it's always about inspiration. So what has been your big inspiration this last week?
Okay, the grackles for one thing, for sure. But I am also fascinated by anting.
Really?
Yes.
I'm getting excited what you're going to talk about, I think.
Okay, so anting is what birds do. They will pick up ants with their beaks and then rub the ants on their feathers, or they will sometimes sit on the ground near an anthill and have the ants crawl on their feathers. And there is this huge debate over the whole purpose of this, right? Why do birds do this? Is it, some people say it's because whatever the secretions that the ants have serve as a fungicide, something like that, to get rid of mites or whatever it is that are in their feathers. And some people say it's so that they can get rid of the poison so that they can actually eat the ants. And some people say it's just part of their preening behavior.
That is very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
I didn't either. This was a fact I found when I was looking up stuff about the grackles. And I'm like, this is so fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Right? And just, it intrigues me to no end, and I'll probably end up writing a poem about it or something, but
I need to know if it's a symbiotic or a predatory thing. Now I need to know.
Yeah, really.
That's the thing that the scientists can't agree, right? Ornithologists can't agree as to why they do this. They just do it.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to have to go look that up now.
Yeah, well, that's totally something new.
So fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, So I love when I find information out like that, and it makes me laugh. And I'm like, it's just, nature is so cool, right?
Absolutely.
Creatures do all these things all the time, and we're never quite aware of everything and why things happen, and we just have to embrace that mystery.
Well, if I was a listener to an art box, I would be off right now to ChatGPT and asking this question. So
see what AI has to say.
Yeah, but we'll wait. We'll wait for the poem.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You read my mind.
Well, DeAnna, thank you so much. I think I could go on for another couple hours. And Melissa, thank you for sitting in here.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you for putting up with my chaotic questioning.
Oh, no, your questioning was great. This wouldn't have been a good podcast if it wasn't for you. I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this. This was just a delightful way to spend my time today.
Always a pleasure, Steve.
Broadcasting from the Mesquite Works Steam Center in the scenic Mojave Desert, the Artbox sponsors thank you for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Samsung, iHeartRadio, Podchaser, and Amazon Music. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We are on Facebook and Instagram as The Artbox. We welcome all comments. You can email us at artboxvv@gmail.com. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of its hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of our sponsors.